detention because of the New Zealand offer to take Australian responsibility asylum seekers and refugees from our offshore detention centres. So the whole issue of the freedom of movement across the Tasman has been a big one and a tense one in relation to who can come and go and who should be prosecuted where. But our Prime Minister, on his part, has made his view clear that he believes that this person will be prosecuted in New Zealand.
And just very quickly, I think you alluded to it earlier, immigration, of course, going to be part of your election debate, as it always is. Is it the case that there's been a drop in the cap for annual migration, but you've been struggling to fill the cap anyway?
Yes, so the Prime Minister is formally announcing today, but has foreshadowed over the last couple of days, that the new policy under the government will be an annual cap of 160,000 migrants. Now, to date, it has been a cap of 190,000, but in the last couple of years, they haven't reached it anyway. The current figure is around 160,000. So really, it's not going to have much of a material difference on what the way things are at the moment, but it will enable the government to make a statement about migration, and it's also going to announce special measures to encourage foreign students and others coming to work in Australia from overseas to move to regional areas rather than the cities, which are very congested. They'll be talking about accelerating their path to permanent residency and offering other kinds of incentives to move to the country. So there's a package of measures to be announced, and I think that perhaps some of the rhetoric around this debate will be different than it might have been had these been announced a week or two ago.
Karen, thank you very much. Karen Middleton, our Australia correspondent. 8 minutes to 10 it is on 9 and we expect we might be taking a media conference around 10 live, but let's get to our guest now, who's very patiently waiting for us in the Dunedin studio. We are going to talk about ways to minimise your personal carbon footprint. Is investing in solar panels and an electric vehicle the way to go for those who can afford it, or are there other better and more affordable options, particularly for those who can't? Dr. Janet Stevenson is the director of Otago University's Centre for Sustainability. She says there are 10 main ways individuals can make a difference. Janet, good morning.
Good morning.
What is the average carbon emissions out of the average household each year?
Well, I think we need to look at ourselves in context of the world. We're about the 5th highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions, and that's a serious worry and something that we really need to start to address. But that problem is something that we can address at a personal and household level, but also needs to be addressed very much at a governmental level and a business level. But I can focus in on what we can do as a household by looking at initially where the major emissions come from per household.
Which are what?
So if we look at an average New Zealand household, about 25% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, about another 25% come from the energy we use in our homes, and a surprising 40% come from the food that we eat. So looking across that does vary a great deal between wealthier households and less wealthy households, with a great increase as we go up towards the wealthier end of households. And so those proportions will change, but significantly those are the 3 big areas that we need to address.
Well, let's run through the top 10 and take perhaps the one likely to have the most impact first, if that works for you.
Sure. Well, the one that's going to have the most impact is actually very simple and relatively inexpensive and probably cheaper. It's reducing the amount of meat and milk that we consume. There have been recent studies that show that the biggest impact we can have as individuals on our greenhouse gas footprints is actually looking at our diet. That's not saying everybody has to become a vegan or even a vegetarian, but it does mean reducing the amount of meat, maybe reducing the portion size, or reducing the number of days a week that we eat it. And that in itself has a significant impact.
All right, and number 2?
Number 2 in terms of impact is, I would say, is looking very seriously at your transport emissions, and particularly at your flying. Flying really can blow out your greenhouse gas emissions. So for an average household, the greenhouse gas emissions from your car transport will be equalled by a flight to Perth. So really thinking about how often you fly. People are starting to talk about no-fly years, flying less frequently, or if you do fly, offsetting those greenhouse gas emissions. And Air New Zealand does have the ability to do that as you book. I just booked a flight from Dunedin to Auckland return the other day, and it was, I think, $6.36 to offset that. Or you can offset after the event through a couple of companies in New Zealand who offer carbon offsetting for international flights.
Home energy gets complicated, and what are some of the things to consider?
Home energy is, it's an important area, and it also is very, very combined with the health and well-being of families. So addressing that is a really important issue for how we live our lives in comfort. And the government has had a long-standing insulation campaign, and that's a really important way to hold the heat in or keep the hot out of your house in hot weather. But importantly, also thinking about what kinds of heating you use and moving towards heat pumps or wood-fired heating if you possibly can. But increasing, I suppose there's an interest and very much part of the conversation is should we put PV on the roof and start to generate our own electricity?
Solar photovoltaics, yeah.
Solar photovoltaics.
And what do you need to weigh up there, especially as of now?
You need to weigh up, firstly, does it make sense for you in the particular location in New Zealand that you are, the amount of sunshine hours you get, the angle of your roof, whether you're home during the day when the most energy is being produced or not, and whether you've got the ability to store that surplus energy in, for example, batteries or maybe put it into your hot water cylinder. But increasingly also there are novel ways to start to deal with that surplus, such as local energy markets where you can sell your surplus to your neighbours and other people in the vicinity and make a little bit of money out of that. So there are many ways and things to take into consideration, and there are websites, for example, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, that give advice about the sorts of things you should take into account. But importantly for New Zealand, we're different from somewhere like Australia where the majority of electricity is generated through greenhouse gas rich sources such as coal. In New Zealand, around 80 to 85% of our electricity is already renewable, and so it doesn't make such a huge difference here as it does in some other countries to put PV on your roof.
What are the cost? Oh, yes, cost is a big one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. So the cost of photovoltaics has gone down significantly. So in the mid-2000s, it might have cost about $40,000 to put a 3 kilowatt array on your roof. Today, it would be about $9,000 installed.
It's interesting, the debate also over the ability to feed back energy into the grid and to be paid for that. There's probably policy things still to be thrashed out, aren't there, to really make this system work as well as it could?
Yes, well, some countries have had a feed-in tariff, i.e. to encourage people to install solar. In New Zealand, as I said, that's not been so important from a policy perspective, and so people are not given a premium for feeding back into the grid. And some people think that's a good idea, and some people think it's not a good idea. So that's a whole area for debate.
Yes, just a minute left, Janet. We do need to cross shortly to a media conference. Just a minute left. What are some of the bigger picture things, the less obvious things that people should think about?
Well, one thing I'd like to mention is thinking about where your money is. So most of us have some kind of KiwiSaver or superannuation if we're lucky. Some people have investments. Those investments, whether they're by you or by your super scheme or Kiwi Bank, are actually being invested in some sort of business somewhere in the world. There's an increasing concern about investment in carbon producing businesses, and a divestment campaign has been undertaken throughout the world where lots of people are dropping those investments and investing in other things. And it's very clear in New Zealand there's something called the Responsible Investments Association Australasia, and they are seeing a huge rise in people who are saying we want our money to be invested in green solutions, and there's a lot of evidence that those investments actually make more money than those that are invested in, for example, coal or greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks very much. Dr. Janet Stevenson from the University of Otago. RNZ News, and then we'll begin also with a police media conference very soon.
RNZ News at 10. Good morning. I'm Nicola Wright. Prime Minister has arrived in Christchurch for her second visit since Friday's massacre. And the Police Commissioner Mike Bush is holding a news conference in Christchurch about now. We will cross to that as soon as he begins speaking. Jacinda Ardern, along with a delegation of MPs and officials, flew from Wellington this morning and will be meeting soon with students and teachers at Cashmere High School. 3 Cashmere High students and 1 former student died in the terror attack. Christchurch City Council has confirmed the first burial of a victim of the mosque shooting will take place at 11 o'clock today at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Linwood. The authorities in charge of releasing the bodies say a strict process is being followed. Families have been pleading to have their relatives' bodies given back to them for burial. Post-mortems have been done on all 50 who died, but only 6 victims had been returned to their families as of last night. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell attended a news conference held by the Chief Coroner, Judge Deborah Marshall.
She made it absolutely clear that she could not give a date. She couldn't make a commitment because there were very detailed steps, international guidelines, best practice to ensure that there was a proper victim identification process carried out. The worst thing would be to return the wrong body to the wrong family.
Leanne Dalzell. National news organisation Stuff is winding back its use of the name of the man charged with murdering 50 people in Christchurch on Friday. Media organisations are grappling with the best way to cover the story, including his appearance at the High Court in Christchurch on April the 5th. The accused gunman plans to represent himself, raising questions over whether he'll use the trial as a platform to promote his ideology. Editorial Director Mark Stevens says Stuff journalists will avoid naming him where they can.
We think that now it's kind of appropriate that we have told our audience and community who this guy is to not continue to give him any additional profile.
Mark Stevens. At RNZ, the Chief Executive Paul Thompson says his newsroom will exercise firm editorial judgment in reporting the trial. Fonterra has returned to profitability but says it's far from satisfied with the result. The cooperative made a first-half net profit of $80 million in the 6 months to January, but its underlying profit was down by 29% on the year earlier. Sales fell slightly to $9.75 billion. The Chief Executive, Miles Hurrell, says a steady performance of New Zealand's ingredients business has been offset by challenges in Australia, which has been affected by a drought. He says the disappointing performance is the reason it lowered its full-year earnings guidance to between 15 and 25 cents a share last month. Fonterra plans to sell its half of DFE Pharma, in addition to previously announced plans to sell the Tip Top ice cream business. A Northland forestry company says it's seen no evidence a Whangarei log truck operator is unsafe. The Transport Agency is revoking the licence of Stan Seminoff Logging, a carting company owned by the city's former mayor. It says the company incurred 116 traffic offences in 4 years and failed to fix driver fatigue and behaviour problems. But Neil Gherkins of Northland Forest Managers says that's news to him.
We do a health and safety audit annually on them, checking their health and safety systems, not a mechanical audit of their trucks, but in terms of recording incidents, following up on reports, the drivers understanding their safety policies and what they should be doing in the forest. And we had a 100% score on their last audit just under 12 months ago.
Neil Gherkins says revoking the licence will disrupt the harvesting of forests. Stan Seminoff Logging plans to appeal against the Transport Agency's decision. The UN says Cyclone Idai has triggered a massive disaster in southern Africa. An aid group says 400,000 people have been made homeless in central Mozambique, and parts of Zimbabwe and Malawi have also been hit. Floodwaters are reportedly so deep in some areas that trees and telephone poles are completely submerged. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka is in eastern Zimbabwe.
The weak, the old, women with children on their backs trekked for hours, often through knee-high mud to get to safety. The makeshift centre has only the basics: food, shelter, and they've been running out of medicine. We heard harrowing stories of homes with people still in them swept away into nearby Mozambique, never to be seen again. Air rescue efforts are underway. A pregnant woman and 9-year-old boy, his face swollen and crushed, emerged from the helicopter. The death toll is steadily climbing and has surpassed 100.
Shingai Nyoka reporting. That's the news.
Good morning, everyone. To follow on from previous briefings, I want to honour my commitment to ensure that I continue to keep you updated on the investigation and the process to date. Specifically today, I want to talk about the process to reunite the victims with their loved ones. This is, for us, an absolute priority for family reasons, for compassionate reasons, and for cultural reasons. That's progressing very well. It was our intention to do what we could to complete that by today. We are making very good progress. As of last night, at 11:30 p.m, 21 of those victims had been formally identified and were being made available to release to their loved ones. By midday, there will be a further, we believe, 6 victims identified and available to their families. By the end of today, by the end of Wednesday, we should have completed the majority of those identifications. But I have to say that some of those victims will take a little longer. I want to assure people about how much we're doing in this area. We have over 120 people involved in this process. So from the mortuary process to the reconciliation process, the identification, and then presenting to coroners. We have the country's best pathologists. We have a large police team. We have a large number of forensic experts. We have international experts as part of that 120 strong team whose absolute focus is reuniting these victims with their loved ones. We also have 21 family liaison officers who are meeting and have met with every one of those families. They're there to ensure those people get all the information they need. Now that team is being led by Inspector Wendy Robilliard and Inspector Mark Harrison, who tragically have a lot of experience in this domain. We also have Deputy Commissioner Homaha, who's working very closely with communities to ensure that they, at the highest levels, are getting all of the information that we can provide. As police, I've said our number one priority is the victims and their families, but we do, of course, have other obligations. And the first one, on behalf of the Chief Coroner and all of the coroners, is to ensure absolute accuracy in that identification process. It must be to the standard required for a coroner, part of our process, and we have 6 coroners, including the Chief Coroner, on site right here to enable that to occur, working with our reconciliation team. That standard of identification must be to evidential standards, and that occurs here. So there is a hearing for every one of those victims taking place very close to where you are now. And of course, if we get that wrong, that is unforgivable. So we're focused on getting that right. Absolutely. As you all know, the other responsibility of the police is the prosecution of this person. And part of the process I'm talking about is not just delivering to the coroner an evidential standard for identification. We must prove for prosecution the cause of death to the satisfaction of the coroner, to the judge. You cannot convict for murder without that cause of death. So again, this is a very comprehensive process that must be completed to the highest standard. That's what's going on here today. Of course, we would like to do that as quickly as possible, but it must be done as professionally and accurately as possible. To get it wrong is unforgivable, and you cannot come back from that. I've got one or two more things to say, and then I'll do everything I can to answer your questions. The second point I just want to give some clarity to is the timeline for our response, which I believe was fantastic. We gave some general details. I want to give more specific details. I can tell you that within 5 minutes and 39 seconds, our first responders, armed, on the scene, ready to respond. Within 10 minutes, our armed offenders squad were on scene, ready to respond. And within 21 minutes, the person that is now in custody was arrested. 21 minutes from when we were first notified to when that person was intervened and arrested and away from further harm from the public. I've said before, we strongly believe we stopped him on the way to a further attack. So lives were saved by our staff, courageous in their intervention. That's all I have at the moment. I'm happy to try and answer your questions.
Commissioner, could you just go through the numbers of victims that have been identified and ready for release again as of 11:30 last night?
Yes, as of 11:30 last night, 21 people, 21 of these victims were formally identified. A coroner's hearing had been held here, and they are ready to be reunited with families. Some already have. Those hearings are commencing right now as we gather, and I anticipate there will be another 6 completed by midday, and that process will then carry on until the very long hours of this evening. So there will be more. So the majority, we hope, will be completed by the end of today, Wednesday.
When do you expect all bodies to have been released?
Some will be more difficult. So all I can say at the moment, I don't want to set false expectations, is that the majority will be completed by tonight, but some will take a little longer.
And why is that, Commissioner? Why are some more difficult?
To reach the evidential threshold for the coroner, to get some of the, what we describe as the ante-mortem data to compare to the post-mortem data. Sorry, I'm being a little technical, but this is how it works. To get sufficient information that we can present to a coroner to an evidential standard to prove the identity of that person.
Commissioner, I'm from the Wall Street Journal. I just wanted to ask, a few days into the investigation now, can you give us an idea of your priorities in the international investigation? What sort of cooperation are you looking for and have received internationally? Are you getting any clearer picture of the gunman's movements overseas, path to radicalisation, that sort of thing from your international contacts?
Yes, and I have to be careful about what I say because we have prosecuted this person. Charges are laid. So as much as I want to answer your question as fully as possible, I have to be careful about what I put into the domain now that a prosecution has been commenced. But I can assure you this is an absolute international investigation. So the sharp end is here in Canterbury. We have stood up a very big investigation and intelligence unit in Wellington. So that involves the New Zealand Police, our intelligence partners, and partners from all around the world. So we have the FBI on the ground here and in Wellington. We have the Australian Federal Police, the New South Wales Police, other Australian jurisdictions, but we're also working very closely with other countries, our other Five Eyes partners, in terms of cooperation around the profiles, the travel, etc., to build a comprehensive picture of this person that we will put before the court. I myself spoke to the director of the FBI several days ago, who has, as we do in these occasions, offered every support. But that support, what it looks like on the ground, is a lot of their expertise is now here helping with that investigation, and they're doing what they can right around the world.
So that's the role of the FBI. So FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation officers are here in Christchurch, what on loan essentially, because what's the
Yeah, they've travelled here, principally in Wellington, to assist in the investigation around profiling, but of course they have expertise, tragically, on these types of investigations, so they're lending their expertise to the New Zealanders. So we have the responsibility to head the investigation, but we get support internationally for that.
Just on the alleged attacker, can you clarify how many guns he had on him and how many were actually used?
Look, what we've put in the domain is that, and again I've got to be a little careful how I couch this because the matter's now within the courts, but what we put in the public domain is the fact that 2 assault rifles, shotguns and perhaps 1 other firearm
were used in the attack, or he had on him in total?
That I'm not going to say what we believe was used in the attack because that's the evidence we'll put before the court, but what we can say is what we seized, and they were assault rifles and at least 1 semi-automatic shotgun.
And were any purchased from Gun City?
I'm not going to talk about that at this point.
When you say that the police officers stopped him on the way to potentially another attack, have you identified somewhere that you think that he was going?
Yes, but I'm not going to go into those details. I don't wish to traumatise others, so that will form part of the court case. But we absolutely believe we know where he was going, and we intervened on the way.
And was it somewhere where there were a lot of people?
I can't answer that question.
Was it another mosque? Was it another?
I can't go into that detail.
Had he travelled to Christchurch before the trip he's made to commit this attack?
Again, this will all form part of the case. We do have that information, but what I don't want to do is give out information that may later prejudice a very, very serious prosecution for murder and other matters.
Did you investigate that place that you believe he intended to go to? Have you been to that address or been to that location to check whether there were any devices laid there ahead of it?
No doubt that did form part of one of the phases. That was done right across Canterbury, actually.
Commissioner, do you believe that an apology is needed for the families who have had delays in getting their loved ones back? Families who say that police have lied to them and said that they'd get them back sooner than they are. Do you think there's an apology needed from you to those families for the delays?
The reason I'm here is to get the information to the public, to the families. We've got really good liaison officers who are sharing all the information possible. I absolutely understand the grief and some of the anger that may come. It's absolutely natural. But we have an obligation on behalf of them and all New Zealanders to get this right. We are professionals, so we have to get the identifications absolutely correct. We have to prove cause of death. We've got all the expertise and resource required. We're doing it as quickly as possible, but in a way that ensures we don't make mistakes.
Thank you, everybody.
There is an entire room of journalists.
Can you rule out
you talked about identification being difficult for some of the victims. Is the video being used in that identification process at all?
So there's forensic being used in terms of the identification. There's also circumstantial evidence being used as part of that as secondary means to identify these people. As you can imagine, there's overwhelming information that we need to put together. That's one of the reasons why this takes a little time. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Can you roll out more?
Sorry, there's some who haven't had an opportunity yet.
So you go.
Can you please give us an update on the Kiwi Farms website? Can you confirm that they refused to hand over information, and have you progressed on that conversation with them?
Look, that is part of the investigation. I am aware of what's occurred, but no, I can't go into it at this point.
Commissioner, how are your officers coping? The people who were there that day, what trauma support are they needing being offered?
Of course, one of my priorities as the Commissioner of Police is to make sure that our officers involved, especially as first responders, who did an outstanding job. I went to the scene myself last night to get some idea of what they would have confronted. They absolutely need our support. They're getting all the support they need. But not just them, everyone involved in this gets affected by the grief and the sorrow and the horror of this event. So we're making sure they get all that support. We have psychologists, psychiatrists, a huge welfare team behind us and the other emergency services. You know, you please remember what St. John's Ambulance and others, people at the hospital, have had to go through. So you're right to ask, they absolutely deserve the best support.
And just to check a fact, as a British reporter, you talked about international experts, forensics, pathology, you talked about the FBI. Do I need to know about any British involvement?
We're definitely talking with our counterparts over there. They're doing their bit. I don't know of... we have an intelligence phase of this, so that part's not for me to talk to, obviously. I just want to share this around a little bit.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner, why are helicopters flying sorties at night?
That's all around reassurance. So I am aware that some people, it affects people in different ways, but I can say it's to give real public assurance that the police are here. It's purely for that reason, but if it's affecting people in a negative way, I'm very conscious of that, and we'll look at that.
Can you deny there is an ongoing threat?
Right now, the current threat level for New Zealand is at high, so we're taking absolute precautions. It's about that. If there was a specific threat, we'd make sure we communicated.
Have you recovered all remnants of explosives from the gunman?
We believe so, but again, that's an evidential part of the investigation. I'd prefer not to go into. I do want to share this around.
Can you just clarify about the response after the initial response, which was very fast? There are some questions about how many first responders, especially emergency personnel, working on the wounded were there. Can you clarify the scale of the secondary response? How many people were there? You know, where did they come from? Ambulances?
I can confirm it was considerable. Every available resource was deployed. Can't give you absolute numbers, but I'm sure they will be available at some point.
Commissioner, on the ongoing threat issue, could I just ask, there's been a lot of Twitter traffic around the world about this being the start of a war. How concerned are you at this stage about that traffic, about the possibility of follow-up attacks, copycat attacks, that sort of thing?
Look, that's always a consideration. We've learnt internationally that should be our focus. I've talked about what the New Zealand Police and our partner agencies will do, especially over the next 4 to 6 weeks. It is about being absolutely vigilant, absolutely visible, absolutely ready to respond to anything. You know, there's been 1 or 2 emergency scares around airports and bags left. We'll be there immediately. We've asked the public, see something, say something, call us. You can never get that wrong. So please, any information that's out there, if anything worries you, we're there for you.
Thank you, everybody.
Commissioner, could you just explain the identification process a little more fully? Because I understand that effectively none of the families, perhaps bar one, have been involved in any visual identification process. Why have you been reluctant to use the families to try and identify victims, and then how are you establishing their identity?
Yeah, sure, that's a very important point. So it's a very comprehensive process. So I've been working, so I spent yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, stepping myself right through that process, even though I have some experience in that. I just wanted to be assured that we were doing everything we possibly could. So the process actually commenced for one of the very first times at the scenes of this crime. We then have a very comprehensive and well-practiced process of going through the identification so that we can present evidence to coroners who make the final decision. Your point around visual is that forms part of what we call secondary evidence. So we are doing that as part of this process, but the primary evidence we need for identifications is around fingerprints, DNA, and odontology. That's the top bar, but we use circumstantial and visual as part of that process.
But have you been using visual? Because I understand families haven't been able to come in and say that is my father, that is my son, or anything like that.
No, we have been, and I was at the mortuary when one was being prepared yesterday, and that was completed.
Commissioner, some comments from the Turkish president campaigning on the Gallipoli Peninsula today, threatening retribution for what has happened here in the context of a political rally, specific retribution against the gunman here. Does that concern you? How helpful is that those comments are being made by a head of state? And is there any extra protection offered for the gunman?
Look, the first thing I'll say to that is that our focus here in the New Zealand Police is the safety of all New Zealanders. We are taking care to be alert to all kinds of conversations, and that will inform our deployment. The points you raised, some of them are not for me to comment on, but needless to say, we're aware of the context and the environment and international precedents in terms of what can occur following such tragic and horrific events, and that's what we're deploying to.
Can you rule out accomplices? Can you rule out if someone helped this person?
What I can say at the moment, most positively, is there was only one attacker. The investigation focus is to work out whether anyone else was involved in supporting or in any other way, and we're still conducting that part of the investigation.
Could there, for instance, be someone who went and scoped out the scenes of attack? Are you potentially looking for someone who went and scoped out the scenes of attack?
We're looking at all of that, but we don't have a specific person or persons that we're currently looking at in that context.
So well,
but we're keeping a very open mind.
There could well be these people out there in New Zealand that helped this guy.
I'm just saying we are looking at no one specifically, but it's still a major part of our investigation, more to eliminate what you're asking about.
Do you have enough evidence now to lay more charges against the accused?
That's the process at the moment. So the next appearance is in the High Court on the 5th of April. There will undoubtedly be more charges. We're working towards, as you can imagine, a considerable number of the most serious charges.
What happened to the other 3 people who were arrested on the day? Where are they now? What were they arrested for? How did they fit into the overall picture?
Okay, can I have this as the last question, please?
Yeah, one more.
One more. You haven't had a turn, so we'll do that. So in terms of that, I think I've been quite clear. So there was a lone gentleman who appeared at one of the cordons. He wasn't involved. He did have a firearm, so that's being dealt with. There was another couple who turned up at a cordon, a male and a female. She has been released without charge. I do understand that the male in that vehicle has been charged with firearm offences. We do not believe they were in any way related to the attacker or the attack. So one more over here, thank you.
Have you worked out yet what the gunman got up to in between checking out of his Dunedin flat and last Friday?
I'm not quite sure what you mean in terms of checking out of his
flat. Well, I thought he'd moved out, hadn't he? Of his flat down there?
No, not to my knowledge.
Right. Okay, so have you established his movements anyway before the shootings?
That's all part of the inquiry. So thank you very much. I will.
Clerical thing, the discrepancy between the 36 minutes reported a couple of days ago and the 21 minutes today. Why the discrepancy?
No, that's a fair question. I think the 36 related to when we had him back here safely in custody. But when he was in or under arrest of those 2 very brave officers was about 21 minutes. Thank you very much for everything. We'll continue to keep you updated as regularly as possible. Thank you.
Commissioner, just in
Thank you.
Australian inquiries, because they've been diverted back to you.
Yards and learning the mathematical fundamentals, but then applying it to thinking creatively with mathematics.
Everyone today, be it parents or school teachers, or head teachers or whatever, should be very sympathetic of today's math teachers, because they're having to teach math in the most difficult period of math teaching since mathematics began.